to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock and I'm Michelle Dewberry. Coming up tonight, a new report has shown that net migration into the UK is unlikely to drop anytime soon. You don't say. Have we lost control? Did we ever have it in the first place? And when it comes to a cap of some kind, what number would be the right one? You tell me. And we all know, don't we, our prisons are overcrowded. So I want to explore the Justice Secretary's new plan to allow low-level criminals to basically either come out early or even to go out into the community and serve their sentence there. What do you think to that? Fascinated to know your view. Also, according to a new poll, over 50% of us do not trust the NHS to deliver our service when we basically need it. And do you trust them? I really hope that you do. But do you think it would be there in your hour of need? Also, I want to look at the SNP. They are proposing price caps, basically, on supermarket foodstuffs. And get this, the Welsh Parliament has banned GB News from its parliamentary televisions. Apparently, we're toxic. Is this censorship, really, in 2023? What is going on? We've got it all to come and more. But before we get into it, let's grab tonight's latest headlines.
Michelle, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the top story from the GB Newsroom is that aid agencies are warning today of a deepening humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza amid fears the conflict will spread throughout the Middle East. Palestinian Authority says 80 people were killed by Israeli airstrikes in southern Gaza overnight, where the military had told civilians to take refuge. Hundreds of thousands have gathered near the Rafah crossing with Egypt. That remains closed again today. And the United Nations is saying it believes Israel's so-called siege of Gaza and its evacuation orders could be in breach of international law. It's warned that all hospitals could run out of fuel within 24 hours. And the World Health Organization says at least 2,800 people have been killed in Gaza. Well, the US President Joe Biden is on his way to the region tomorrow. He'll be in Israel before attending a summit where he'll meet Arab leaders in Jordan. He'll be there to try to calm the conflict's regional effects. Yesterday, he gave a clear warning to Iran, told them not to get involved. But in a separate development, Iran pledged to take preemptive action against Israel in the coming hours. Well, a British teenager who's been missing since last weekend's terror attacks by Hamas has been confirmed dead. 13-year-old Yahel on the right of your picture, if you're watching on television, was killed when gunmen attacked her kibbutz on the 7th of October. Yahel was killed along with her mother Leanne, while her elder sister Noya and father Eli are still missing. The Prime Minister has called for the immediate release of hostages. It's thought another 9 Britons are among the 200 people being held hostage by Hamas. Well, in news away from Israel, the return of Islamist terrorism poses a threat to all European nations, according to the French President Emmanuel Macron. His comments came a day after 2 Swedish football fans were shot dead in a terror attack in Brussels last night, just before Belgium's Euro 2024 qualifier against Sweden. Belgian police say the suspect, who identified himself on social media as a member of Islamic State, was shot dead this morning. Belgium's Prime Minister, Alexander De Croo, says terrorists can't be allowed to succeed.
Attackers want to seed fear, distrust and division in our free society. Terrorists have to understand that they will never succeed in this mission. They will never subdue our free society. With their hate and violence, they show above all their powerlessness. Terrorism will never beat us.
The Scottish First Minister is pledging £300 million to cut NHS waiting lists in Scotland. Humza Yousaf told the SNP conference in Aberdeen the cash could reduce waiting lists by 100,000 patients by 2026. In his first conference speech since taking over from Nicola Sturgeon as party leader, Mr Yousaf also pledged to freeze council tax in Scotland next year. The First Minister, who has family in Gaza, is also calling on the international community to set up a refugee programme for those fleeing in the Gaza Strip. Now, a man has been remanded in custody after appearing in court over the murder of a 70-year-old in Hartlepool. Terence Carney was using a cash machine when he was attacked in the town centre on Saturday morning. Another man remains in hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. 44-year-old Ahmed Alid is charged with murder and the attempted murder of another man. It follows an investigation by counter-terrorism police. A Conservative MP accused of bullying and sexual misconduct has had the whip removed. Peter Bone will now sit as an independent MP. Yesterday, a parliamentary panel found that he had committed varied acts of bullying and an act of sexual misconduct against a member of his staff in 2012 and 2013. The panel recommends he be suspended for 6 weeks, a move that could trigger a recall petition and perhaps a by-election. The member for Wellingborough denies all the allegations against him. Now, Greta Thunberg was arrested today after protesting against oil and gas companies in central London. The Swedish climate campaigner was taking part in a fossil-free London protest at a hotel on Park Lane where oil executives were meeting up. Thunberg has this year been detained by police and removed from protests in Sweden, Norway and Germany. And lastly, as you may have heard on the weather report, yellow weather warnings for wind and rain are in place from tomorrow with the arrival of Storm Barbette. It's the second named storm of the season and it's going to last until Saturday. The Met Office warns of potential flooding, power cuts and travel disruption. The weather warning covers much of Scotland, the eastern part of Northern Ireland, as well as the north and east of England. You're with GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Thanks for that, Polly. I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, the life peer in the House of Lords and former Conservative MEP, Jacqueline Foster, and the contributing editor at Novara Media, Michael Walker. Good evening to both of you. You're very welcome tonight. And you know the drill, don't you? You can get in touch with me all the usual ways. gbviews@gbnews.com is how you email me, or you can tweet me at gbnews. Now, the story that I was trying to get round to last night, net migration. There's been a report out now that says it's unlikely to drop below what we saw pre-Brexit anyway, any time soon. Now, this is not really surprising, is it? Because at the moment we're having a lot of people enter the country from a variety of different places, different war zones and all the rest of it. We seem to be having mass population shift now on a scale that is enormous, and I do not see that getting any better anytime soon. So some people are asking, have we lost control of immigration? Did we ever have it in the first place? Do we need to put a cap on migration? Your thoughts?
Oh, well, I suppose in terms of the numbers from this study and in terms of the net migration we're currently seeing, which is at record levels, right, that is not principally people coming here irregularly. That's principally people coming here because we decided we want them to come. So,
I didn't say it was irregular. Talking about net migration.
Well, you were talking about people who we can't control, and you're saying they're coming from lots of different war zones. So the vast majority of people coming over here that will make up these numbers are people who are coming here to study, coming here to work. Some will be family reunion, but the vast majority coming to study and coming to work. So we do have control over that. We've decided that for our universities, it helps to have lots of international students. We've decided that for our businesses, it helps to have a fair few international workers. So if we wanted, we could reduce that. Obviously, when we were within the European Union, there was freedom of movement. We did have less control. Now we do have control, but a decision is being made by politicians and, you know, in conversation with businesses and universities to say, actually, this is quite a good thing. And so that's why numbers are remaining quite high.
Do you think there should be a cap on net migration figures?
No.
No? Just however many? And Jacqueline, your thoughts?
Well, the question is, will we ever be able to control it? And I have to say, not while we've got barbaric extreme terror groups who are allowed free rein across the Middle East, Asia and Africa. There are hostile states as well. These people are encouraged. They cause chaos, disruption and fear. What we have tended to do, in my view, is appease far too often many of these countries. So we've spent billions in aid over the decades. If you think from sort of World War II, most of the money never ever goes to these very poor civilians that are living in these countries. The money, as we've seen now with Hamas, Hezbollah, all of them, the money is actually spent on arms. It widens from arms. It's in the drugs trade. They'll be involved in people trafficking. And I say this because I was brought up with in a sectarian city, which was Liverpool, and the situation then evolved with obviously the way the IRA was behaving. So in my first job, when I started with British Airways all those years ago, we were up against hijacking from terrorist organisations, the PLO. And, of course, the IRA was also a terrorist organisation. And I think that, of course, you want to try and come to some sort of resolutions with these things. But until leaders in major governments across the world stop thinking that aid is the answer when it's not, and start taking to task these governments who allow their civilians to virtually die of starvation while they're spending the money on many, many other things, we will not get any sort of solution or resolution to this. I am an optimist. I'm always an optimist. But I am sick and tired of this pussyfooting around, making excuses of why, for some historical reason, some particular group or some particular country has got some grudge. And while they're allowed and appeased to behave in the manner that they're doing, we are not going to resolve this because it will exacerbate. We've seen what's happened now over the years with illegal immigration. It's so hard to control. If we do try to put measures in place in this country, for example, we then find, obviously, there's a lot of politicians who don't want to. They want open borders and all of this. But you see, I say this,
You're
Michelle...
You're the governing party. This is what I can't get my head around. You've been the governing party for over a decade.
I don't disagree. But equally, the governing party, you've got to have cross-party solutions to these sorts of problems.
Why? You've got a majority.
I don't disagree with that either. We've had a majority, actually, since about 2015, because initially we were obviously in coalition with the Liberal Democrats. And this has exacerbated since the Merkel decision. And it started to exacerbate, I think, with more groups. But one thing I have said, and I have said all along with this, and particularly on the illegality of all of this, is the primary purpose of a nation-state is to protect its citizens. We have people coming in this country and going into other countries throughout Europe. They have no idea who they are. They're coming across borders, and our own governments have got to really clamp down on what's actually going on.
Do you agree with any of that, Michael?
Well, again, I think it's important to sort of separate two different things here. So if we're talking about numbers, then the issue really isn't asylum seekers or people crossing the channel. With numbers, we're talking about students. I think there were 350,000 people who came as students last year, around 250,000 workers. Then in terms of asylum seekers, that was about 80,000, about 45,000 people crossed the channel. So if you're talking about net migration in numbers, then the issue, I mean, I don't think it's an issue. I think it's good for our universities. I think it's fairly good for our economy. And that's people who are coming here completely legally.
Right.
What is what, sorry?
When you're saying it's good, you're talking about 1 minute, we're talking about asylum seekers, and we're talking about channel crossings, and you're saying that's good for the economy. I'm asking, what do you think that people getting in those boats and crossing the channel, is that good for the economy?
Well, so there's different forms of migration which we sort of accept for different reasons. So with students and workers, they are what we'd normally call economic migrants, and everyone agrees that's pretty good for the economy. And when it comes to asylum seekers, obviously the reason we're accepting them is because of international obligations. Now, again, economists tend to say that in the long run, asylum seekers will improve an economy. In the short run, it's somewhat ambiguous. I suppose one other point I wanted to respond to is this idea about appeasement. Because I'm not really sure what that would mean in practice. So if you look at, if we talk about refugees now instead of sort of economic migration, the places where most people come from are places where we have quite actively intervened. So we didn't appease the Taliban. We didn't appease Saddam Hussein. We went in and invaded those countries. And it's then those countries which send a lot of, well, they don't send them because people leave by choice, but people leave as asylum seekers to come to the UK. So I'm not sure what this more sort of proactive foreign policy of anti-appeasement would look like and why that would reduce people who are fleeing their homes.
Well, I don't think you need an O-level or an A-level, frankly. I mean, it's quite obvious that what people do is try to come to resolutions. I have no problem with that. We came to a resolution pretty well with Northern Ireland, and it took decades. So I'm not saying that there's never an answer. But what we know is the groups that we're talking about now, the disruption where it is right now is across the globe. It's across the globe. We know what Iran's doing in terms of funding. We know what's going on. We know that there are monies going into these countries which are actually for the citizens of these countries. It never goes anywhere near them. But we know it happens. And so there is an appeasement in that. I'm using it in that context. And all as I am absolutely saying, the difficulty we also have, and we have it in this country, is about integration. And we've always had a relatively slow process of people coming in and out because we want people to integrate well and we want people to get on. We are now finding there are issues in this country where, you know, the British culture seems to be an issue. Well, the British culture is not an issue. If I go and live in another country, and I've lived in several, I accept that their culture will be different perhaps than mine. I have to accept it, and then I will work alongside and within that. But we are also in a position in this country now, and there are people and there are factions in this country, and they do not appear to even like the country that they are living in. And this is not acceptable, and it just doesn't, it's just not the way forward to how we look positively at how the country is going to grow, how we're going to deal with migration and immigration in the years to come. We need to have some hard thinking about what we're actually going to do and look at the citizens of the United Kingdom, the citizens here already, how we're going to deal with all of this.
Do you want to respond to that?
Well, I suppose, again, on this appeasement point, so you sort of talked about Iran, and I think with Iran, that's, again, another country that we have sanctions on where lots of people are leaving. So people tend to leave countries when there's instability or when there's sort of a crippling economic crisis. And I think Britain's foreign policy has been very mistaken when it comes to that because we often have stoked instability.
Oh, let's not go back on having a row about Britain's foreign policy. We can't turn the clock back. We have got to look at where we are now. We know there are problems.
Like you were talking about foreign policy.
No, but of course we do. We know that, you know, we've done history, a lot of us. You know, we'll know what's happened over the last 200 years or 1,000 years. We know that. We can't turn the clock back. We've got to look at where we are now. How we are going to... We can see where the issues are. How are we actually going to deal with it and start to get some resolution? And as I said, and I go back to that point, unless a lot of these governments around the world start taking responsibility for their own citizens and stop leaving other countries to try and pick up the mess because they're spending aid, they're doing all sorts of things. I've seen it in Africa. I was there many, many times. Many times.
Let me ask
the people never see any benefit from any help that they ever get.
One of my viewers, Jason's just got in touch saying, you've been talking about, the question was about legal immigration. Jackie, he says, Jackie's not answered the question about legal immigration. Would you support a cap, for example, on net migration figures?
I think where you have a difficulty, I'm not opposed to caps. But the difficulty you've got to have with when you put a cap on, what's the cap actually mean? Does it mean the number of people with skills that are coming to the country? Does it mean the number? Did you put the number of people in age groups in terms of those that want to come into the country? Because you're looking at the demand and supply of your economy, and I appreciate that. I think that's a fair point for him to comment on. But I think caps, governments then, you know, they change in the government. They say, we'll put a cap on this and we'll put a whatever on that. And inevitably it shifts. And I think it's just really taking a realistic, hard look at, you know, who should come in, how it should work, and what the real demand is for the economy and the SMEs and the whole supply chain. But also, we've got enough universities, and we've got enough people actually out there who we need to be training ourselves.
Well, do you know what? Pamela has got in touch saying, Michelle, this is very simple. We just need a cap. So I'll throw it back to you, Pam. You tell me, what would that figure look like? And what do you do if you've got jobs that you seemingly can't fill in this country? Do we just leave those vacancies empty? Should companies be allowed to proactively try and recruit from elsewhere? Speaking of which, by the way, a slight tangent but linked before I go to the break, do you think we do enough to incentivise working in this country? Because I'm sure there's still a thing when you're on benefits. I'm sure it's about 16 hours or something. When you get to that particular threshold, you then start losing more money than you perhaps earn. Does that work? Is the balance right on that one? You get in touch and you tell me. When I come back from the break, I'll have some more of your responses, but I also want to talk to you about prisons. There's talk now about reforming how we deal with certain prisoners, perhaps instead of sending them to prison, getting them out into the community, doing stuff like washing graffiti off walls and all the rest of it. Will that solve the crime problem in this country? You tell me.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
energy this time.
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
Hi there, Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight. The live player in the House of Lords and former Conservative MEP Jacqueline Foster alongside me, as is a contributing editor at Novara Media, Michael Walker. We were just talking about immigration there. Lots of people saying that we should be capping it. So again, I shall throw that question back to you. Give me the number. And where do you get that number from? And what happens if there is indeed labour shortages that people in this country, for whatever reason, quite frankly, don't want to fill? What do we do about that? I'll throw it back to you. Get in touch with me and let me know. Jonathan says, well done, Jacqueline Foster. Apparently, Jonathan says you're speaking for the whole of the country. Cool, blimey, that's an achievement, if it's true, right there. Anyway, let's talk prisons, shall we? Because under a year, prison sentences under a year, so your low kind of level criminals and all the rest of it could potentially be scrapped. This is all about looking at the fact that prisons, lots of them anyway, are very overly populated. There's a communication now and a thought process about, rather than sticking these low-level criminals into prisons, Jackie, for, short sentences, get them out, get them tagged, get them out in the community, get them washing, walls or graffiti or whatever. What do you think to that?
Well, I think there are inevitably some people in prison who probably shouldn't be in a prison. I'm not talking about the thugs and the murderers and all of that. You will get some people in there, and they might be doing fairly short sentences for, it might be fraud. I'm not dismissing fraud as not being a serious issue. So I think that there can be ways to look at it. I think funnily enough, there was a debate in the House of Lords this afternoon, which I sat in on, and it was about why they've decided to try and do this because of the number of prisoners, obviously, and the fewer spaces that they've got in prisons. What was particularly interesting that we've got nearly 10,000 foreign prisoners. And we spend about, £500 million a year on them. It costs about £47,000 a head. And I would like to know why they're in our prisons and why they're not deported, frankly. So we're spending a huge amount of money there, and obviously a lot of places.
It's your party that's in power.
It is indeed. It is indeed. I mean, people try and sort all sorts of things out. I think they only managed to deport last year 2,958. And out of an awful lot of people. So as I said, I have no issue in an early release if it is, it's pertinent. But also what you've got to have in place is to ensure, of course, that the probation services and those that are responsible then for making sure that these people are doing what they should do and not what they shouldn't be doing are actually in place and they're able to deal with it. I think the point that we've raised about what they do in America and they do in other countries, and they make prisoners go and actually do some work. I think there's been failures where people have gone out to do work in the community, and apparently
should they be paid for that work?
Well, I think it's not. I don't mind paying somebody for doing something, but apparently there's people and they don't turn up. And even if they're tagged, and so then you've got people trying to chase around, trying to find where they are. So I think the system actually needs to really be, they need to start looking at this seriously. It may be they need to put some more resources in. He did say today that they were looking at putting about another 400 million in, because...
Yeah, 400 million for 800 new cells.
Well, it is, but I mean, as I said, it's not just the prisons themselves, because there is a shortage of capacity. It's how you then deal with those that you don't necessarily need to put in prison. And what you're doing if people are on early release or whatever.
Michael?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a sensible policy to me. I mean, obviously, people who are a danger to society should be in prison, but if you've got someone who's on a sentence which is less than a year, I suppose the question is, what good does it do to put them in prison for 6 months? Because that's hardly protecting society. They're just there for 6 months. It's hardly that they're going to be able to turn their life around.
I think they're often repeat offenders, and then in the end, they've had to put them in. because they've been warned by the magistrate, said a magistrate in the House. He said he'd warned them about 10 times and they still continue to do it, and in the end they have to have a custodial.
But then that's still not going to change their behaviour.
No, I don't.
It's not going to break the cycle.
I am with you there, but, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing here is to talk not just about sentences, but also funding. I mean, I think you're right to talk about the probation service. I mean, when that fella escaped from the prison in Wandsworth, I think it was, wasn't it? There was lots of conversations from prison guards and prison officers about how underfunded, understaffed they are, how high the turnover is, which means that no one ever gets to know any prisoner. And I can't imagine that's particularly good for reforming people if you've got this incredibly high turnover.
Yeah, but that escape was sloppy. The fact that, you know, vans and lorries are not checked when they're going in and out. I mean, I suppose I was bringing it up more just because... It was like Fawlty Towers.
It was a moment when sort of the conditions in prisons were sort of raised publicly. Obviously, this is a slightly different issue here. In terms of the foreign prisoners, I think there's... I can see where you're coming from. I do think there is sometimes a assumption that a foreign prisoner is someone who has just arrived and committed a crime. And I think it's important to note, and I was speaking to a friend of mine who's an academic who works on this, actually, people who've been deported to Jamaica is sort of his particular topic. And there are a bunch of people that he works with, or was interviewing for his thesis, where, you know, they came to the UK when they were 2, right? So they've lived here their whole life. They didn't get a passport for whatever reason, and then they commit a drug offence. I think if you go to prison for more than 12 months, it can be an automatic deportation. And so you've got someone who's lived here their entire life, has no connections to that other country, and then gets deported to there. And I think that the problem there is if you're sort of punishing people twice. Is it double punishment?
I don't think that the majority of people would. There will be exceptions, I don't disagree. But we know we have got a lot of people, and they are nasty, horrible people. And we have got them in prison. It is costing a fortune. And they should... No, my view is if they were not British passport holders, if they're not British citizens, when they have been found guilty, clearly they've been found guilty, otherwise they wouldn't be in prison, and the evidence is such that they clearly are, they should be deported before they're even going into a British prison, frankly. They might have been in while, you know, they're obviously waiting for the case to come up. But I don't see why we're spending absolute millions on keeping prisoners here. You know, you make a contract when you go and live in a country, and you say, I'll come and live in your country, and I understand your rule of law. And sometimes people do get in trouble. I mean, not bad trouble, but they might do. But, you know, this is... You know, if you want to live here, we have a rule of law. If you break the law, then that is what you will get. If you don't like it, then you need to not be here. Go and commit your crimes somewhere else.
But what I don't understand...
It's horrendous.
...is, to me, the Tories are supposed to be the party that are tough
law
on law and order.
I know.
And then, to me, it feels like you guys are just woken up one day and gone, oh, look, these prisons are really overcrowded, so what we're going to do is just let a lot of people off and keep them out of the prison so that we can cover our backsides by making prisons less full. And then it's almost like, and then we'll put this money aside to acquire this land, to build these prisons. This is what I cannot get my head around. When you've been in power for over, not you personally, but when you've been in power for over a decade, surely you forward plan, you can see certain trends. You can see that actually the rate of prisoners is going up, so we need to start investing right in the here and the now. I almost just feel it's like, is this the Tories? Are they doing what they're supposed to be doing? Tough on law and order? Because it does not sound like that to me.
I mean, I have to say, and I'd started in politics and with the party back in the late 80s and on. And I think every successive government that's been in, we've had problems with the prisons. We've always got problems with underfunding. There always seems to be problems, obviously, with capacity. And I think it's a... You know, I think there's also been a change. There's also been a change in the way that... things are handled. I mean, even back in the Major government, and a colleague of mine in the House of Lords, Timothy Kirkhope, he was actually the immigration minister, and there was no messing about in terms of people that needed to be deported. They were deported. We have a heck of a job now, and even actually during the Blair years, it was much more straightforward, but we've had a heck of a job over the last few years now, trying to get anybody deported. When we're trying to get them deported, we know we've had the whole discussion about lawyers turning up at the, you know, planes, we book planes, and the next thing, you know, somebody's not going to be on the plane because there's some more evidence that they shouldn't be deported. So unless you get a real grip of this...
in the law as it stands, and it's within your power to change the law.
Well, where you are right and where I would absolutely agree is I am not sympathetic at all to people coming up with the last minute going, and here's another reason why they shouldn't be deported when, you know, these people, it's legal aid. We are paying for people to be represented. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, they're on the steps of the aircraft. And then, of course, there's another reason why they can't be deported. I mean, it's just...
But again, that is the system. So those lawyers, however frustrating it is, and by the way, I agree, it is frustrating, they are operating within the confines of the system. So if that is a frustration for, say, the ruling party of the country, then I'm just astonished that that system hasn't been changed.
Well, I'd like to see some of them struck off because we knew that there were cases where they'd gone undercover and there were lawyers in there we're paying legal aid to. And, of course, what they were doing, they were telling these people... giving them reasons to play the system.
Because I have to fly to a break
on that one.
What do you think the primary purpose of prison is?
Well, deterrent and reform. So I don't think we should punish people for punishment's sake, but ideally what you want is to have a prison system which means that people think twice before they commit a crime, and then hopefully you reform them when they're in there.
Yeah, I've got to be honest with you, and I always say to all my viewers, they know by now that it's a very good job I am not in charge of this country, because I do believe that the primary purpose of prison is punishment. Yes, of course I support rehabilitation, but to me that is secondary to making you have an awful time in prison, so that, quite frankly, you never want to go back there in all of your life. A little test for you as you go into the break. You tell me, what do you think the average cost of a prison place in the UK is? Don't be Googling it, because I'll know if you do. The average cost of a prison place in this country, you tell me, and I'll see you in 2.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Dewbs and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry with you till 7, the live player in the House of Lords, and former Conservative MEP Jacqueline Foster and the contributing editor at Novara Media, Michael Walker, remain alongside me. I asked you, what do you think the cost of the average prison places in this country? Lee says £130,000. Keith, 41,000. Steve says 83. Sarah says 34. And Trevor says between £250,000 and 300,000. Mike says 37,000. I've got to say, no offence, but you're all wrong. It is just under £47,000. So there you go. Right, let's talk NHS. If you were taken ill, would you have faith and trust that actually the NHS would be there in your hour of need? Because a poll that has been commissioned now suggests that less than half of us would feel that way, say, for example, if we were to, very sadly, be diagnosed with cancer. This was a Lib Dem commission poll, I have to say. Let me start with you. If you became ill, would you trust that the NHS would be there for you?
Well, not in a timely way. I mean, I would trust it to the extent I would go to the NHS if I had a problem. But, I mean, the waiting list for people who have, even serious conditions is very worrying at the moment. And, as you say, this is a Lib Dem poll, but I don't think anyone's going to be surprised by the results. People's dissatisfaction with the NHS at the moment is extraordinary. And I think it is, I think why it is such a shame is because it doesn't need to be this way. Now, in 2010, there was sort of record confidence in the NHS, and that has gradually crumbled since the Tories came to power. So obviously COVID has sort of intensified the situation, but it was the case that the waiting list had gone from 2 million in 2010 to about 4 million in 2019. It's now gone up to 7 million. So COVID obviously made the situation worse, but we were already in a bad situation when we were hit by that pandemic. I suppose another concern, as opposed to just the waiting list, is also staff morale. And hospitals crumbling, right? So the capital or the investment, the infrastructure in our NHS is crumbling. You've got hospital roofs sort of kept up by bits of wood, are reports from around the country. So I think this is a result of underinvestment. I have my concerns about the Labour Party, but I do think Labour governments do tend to fund the NHS better, and that does mean you'll have more confidence in that you'll be seen by your doctor in a timely way.
Is that fair, Jacqueline?
No, I don't think it is. I think people have lost confidence, and I'm not surprised. I had friends, people I knew very well, who didn't see anybody during COVID and subsequently died. And, of course, the 7 million plus waiting lists are going to take a huge amount of time to get better. I don't think it's anything to do with underfunding. I think the problem is we're spending over £200 billion a year on this service. I've always said we've got some great frontline medics, but the structure, in my view, the structure is completely out of date. And if you split the number of 1.4 million employees and you look at the number in the front line and then the number of people, of course, you've got to have good administrators, you've got to have good managers. But some of the things that are going on in these hospitals are absolutely appalling. There's bad oversight. We've had it with some of the hospitals with the maternity units and various things like this. And equally, and there's no excuse for that. There's absolutely no excuse. And I think there are people in place and they're just not really fit to be taking the responsibility to run organisations of that kind. There's also an awful lot of bureaucracy that's attached. I mean, I have friends who are in medicine and they've been surgeons and whatever for many years. And the amount of bureaucracy that they have now, filling in various things all the time, which most of it's pretty well unnecessary. I mean, we just heard, didn't we, fairly recently that they were going to now put another budget in because they needed more diversity officers. I mean, for God's sake, the NHS has got to be one of the most diverse organisations in this country. It always has been since 1948. And so, when they're wasting and spending money, you've got good HR departments in any event. When they're wasting and spending money and coming up with all sorts of silly ideas like this, I'm surprised there's no confidence for people. They're turning up in A&E with stage 4 because they couldn't see a GP. There's still issues seeing GPs now. I mean, I'm getting texts every 5 minutes about going to have a COVID booster, and people are waiting a fortnight to have an appointment. People should never have even be waiting for a fortnight. I think they were waiting for a fortnight during the Blair years. A fortnight's ridiculous. So the system needs to be looked at. How you do it, I have no idea. But my final point is...
Texts are coming then for these boosters. Is there a financial incentive
Of course,
GPs,
of course. Yes,
so
of course.
So you can prioritise those appointments,
of course.
not the ones that perhaps don't have the same financial incentive.
Of course, and I have no issue with somebody doing an appointment over the phone. I think that's fine. It suits many patients. But the reason this backlog,
like
which
that.
Michael, to be fair, no, but some people might want to. They might want to because they're working, and it's just something that's not perhaps particularly major.
Do you like that face telephone? Like everyone's, or so many places now seem to have defaulted to a telephone video conversation with your doctor.
I don't mind it as a first port of call. I mean, ideally, you want the option to see the doctor.
Yeah.
And I think people want to see the same doctor over and over again. That's an issue for them. I mean, I think on this COVID issue, I mean, it might be the case that this is sort of GPs being financially incentivised. I mean, a more simple explanation to me, though, would be in terms of sort of NHS prioritisation, is that it's very, very cheap to vaccinate someone. You don't actually need a doctor to do it. And I assume what they're hoping to do is to avoid more people going into hospital with severe COVID. That's
do you think it's a strategic preventative?
Well, they won't with Omicron anyway.
Move?
Yeah, well, in general, vaccines...
You're a trusting man.
In general, vaccines are a very cost-effective public health measure because they're very cheap to administer, and obviously sort of getting someone in a vaccine is much cheaper than seeing down the line them coming into
but let's just move off that because there's much more serious points here. This isn't now about somebody having a quick jab. This is people who have not been able to see GPs during that 2.5 years, basically. It was so difficult for them. And the consequences, now where you've got the addition with the waiting list, and it's how you then deal with it. I'd like to see a mixed provision service. I'd like to see some private and public, like they have on the continent.
What do you think to the NHS? Do you trust it? And what do you think as well to this often default video conference option? If you had a boil on your backside, I wouldn't quite fancy getting it out in front of a video screen, would you? I don't know. Anyway, Bernard says the problem with the NHS today is that people expect too much from the NHS. John says, and I like this, I'll end on this one before I go to break, nice positivity. John says, I absolutely would trust the NHS. I was diagnosed with liver cancer last year, sorry to hear that, and I had a transplant within 6 months at St James's Hospital in Leeds. John says the NHS have been amazing to me, and I'm very happy to hear that, and I wish you continued good health, John. Now, after the break, I'll have some more of your responses, but I also I want to share this with you. I find it very bizarre. GBNews has been banned from Welsh Parliament televisions. What on earth is going on? I'll see you in 2.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK.
Here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry with you till 7. Jacqueline Foster and Michael Walker remain alongside me. Lots of people are getting in touch, and it's nice as well to get positive NHS stories, because I suspect if you are an NHS staff member, your morale, as we touched on earlier, could perhaps be quite low. Mick says, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer in January 2022, and I had a radical prostatectomy in May 2022. He's just had some radiotherapy, and he says as well that he wants to praise the NHS. It has been absolutely magnificent throughout, he says, when it comes to his treatment. As I said, again, to you, Mick, I wish you continued good health as well. Now, let's be a little bit self-indulgent, if you don't mind, because I do want to talk about GB News. The Welsh Parliament has basically banned GB News from parliamentary televisions. I'll read some of it out. Apparently, GB News has been described as being demeaning to public debate, contrary to our Parliament's values, as of course the Welsh Parliament I'm talking about. It's been removed, they're saying, that there was a recent broadcast that was deliberately offensive, and on it goes. A Labour MP, Jenny Rathbone, she has celebrated this. She's asked the Senate to take this measure. She's tweeted about it tonight, saying she's delighted that GB News has been banned off those televisions. She says that we're toxic. I've got to say, quite frankly, if I was Jenny, I probably would not be so quick to call people toxic if I, like Jenny, had just been suspended previously from my party and asked to go on anti-Semitism training and had formal sanctions against me. I probably wouldn't be describing other people as toxic, but there you go. Jacqueline, what do you make to it all?
Well, the fact that they intend to ban you, the Senate, I think as GB News, I think you should wear it as a badge of honour. Because, frankly, some of the decisions they appear to make, whether they're latest 20-mile-an-hour on most of the roads in Wales, and everybody's having a nervous breakdown with those. What they were doing during COVID, I remember the lockdowns, and I'm on the Welsh border, near the Welsh border, so we'd have a lockdown in England, and they'd decide to have one at a different time. Nobody knew whether they could go to work or not. I just find it astonishing when you have an organisation like the BBC, and we're watching actually a very good series at the moment on Jimmy Savile, and some of the things that took place in some of mainstream media over the years, that you have somebody like this banning GB News because somebody said something that obviously offended somebody. I think it's pathetic, and maybe she's just trying to get a press release out or something.
Yeah, I mean, I actually find this quite concerning. This is, we've got a broadcast licence, we're regulated in the same way as anybody else. So why is it that would be removed from an official television system in that Welsh Parliament? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't have too much skin in this game. I mean, I'd like Novara Media to be on those internal systems, but we can't afford the broadcast.
So do you think that this channel should be banned in that way?
No, well, so, I mean, I think there are questions about whether or not Ofcom should be a little bit beefed up. So I think they're...
In terms of what?
Well, so there are genuine questions that... So, say in the UK, for example, we have avoided some of the polarisation that you have in the United States when it comes to Fox News on one side and MSNBC on the other, and I think people see certain advantages to that. And people worry that GB News sort of will move us into a direction of sort of opinionated political TV, and that could increase polarisation in society, which won't necessarily have a good result. But for me, if I'm a lawmaker, that's about
Let me just respond to that point.
Ofcom, not.
Because the people that express concern now about GB News coming along and people like me giving opinions have had absolutely no issues at all with the polarisation of political debate in this country when the balance was tipped the opposite direction. For example, panel debates were skewed in terms of majority of Remainers and perhaps one Turk and Brexiteer. That kind of representation, that kind of opinion, all the rest of it, that was absolutely fine. And now that actually, I always pick Brexit as the polarising, topic. It seems that's what we're discussing now. On this channel, for example, a Brexiteer would be given a fair hearing, and I would argue that that's sometimes one of the first times that has fairly happened in broadcasting. Then all of a sudden, the criticism comes, oh, look at these people, they should be shut down, they shouldn't be given this voice because it's a voice we disagree with. I mean, this country is polarised, right? We've been polarised long before GB News came along.
Well, I think there are issues that sort of I see on this channel that we're not necessarily already polarised on, and I think there are certain... Climate change, for example. So I think there is a big consensus, or there has been a big consensus, that we do need to get to net zero, that it's very important to tackle climate change. I think there's a faction within the Conservative Party and certain hosts on this channel who want to break that consensus.
People that don't have that consensus have not been given the opportunity to have their views platformed previously, so therefore people think, yes, there's massive full consensus.
Well, can I just come in here? Because the thing is, the reason GB News is a success, and talk radio was the same, it was all around similar time, is because people then felt as though that they were tuning into a station that actually represented their views. Now, there's supposed to be neutrality, particularly with the BBC and various others. I was at the other end as a MEP. I was elected for 15 years, and I've appeared many times on what was then the BBC or ITV, because there was no GB News and there was no Talk TV or whatever it is. And I was very often the one person. I supported Brexit, and I would end up in a debate or whatever, and there was me and there was about 5 others. And so, the mainstream media can't lecture me on what they think is fairness or what's not polarisation. And that's what we have put up with for all these years. And it's so refreshing, and this is why your audiences will grow. It's so refreshing that people with different points of view, and you always have, we're sitting here now, and we are two sides of, opposite sides politically, probably on most things, I would say. And that is what you try to do. And therefore, the audience then can make up their own mind. They might like something you said or I said or nothing I had ever said. They might think we're both mad. No, and the fact, as I said, I'd be flattered that the Senate have done this, because it says more about them. I mean, frankly, to even say something like this is absolutely pathetic.
Well... Go on.
Yeah, I suppose...
Intake of breath there from Michael.
I'm not really here to defend this decision from the Welsh Parliament. It does seem a little bit silly to me.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
I suppose the benefit of the BBC, for example, is even if you do think it has biases, there is some means by which you can sort of complain about that. It does at least try to be impartial. And I suppose the concern about having a less regulated media space is that it's not the case that everyone then gets equal voice. It's that then what buys you influence is money. Right, so I do think this channel does allow different perspectives on, but it does have a leaning to the right.
And don't forget, you've always got an off button. You're not on a 3-line whip watching this programme. You can always turn it off and you can always change. So, people that complain about that, we always have a choice.
Barry's watching. He says, hey, Michelle, I'm still watching. No one will be cancelling you in my home. Thank you very much. Here. Cheers to you, Barry. Look, time flies. That's all we've got time for. Michael, Jacqueline, thank you for your company. Thank you at home. As always, it's much appreciated. Nigel Farage up next. Have a good night. See you tomorrow.
Alex Deegan here with your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. The storm system has yet to fully arrive, but once it does, it's going to drop a lot of rain between now and the weekend. Storm Babette is brewing down to the southwest, initially throwing rain up across the south during Wednesday, but then continuing to track northwards and kind of becoming slow-moving on Wednesday night over Northern Ireland, Northern England, and then into parts of eastern Scotland, where we have an amber warning in place, but we have yellow warnings across a good part of the UK. Keep up to date with those weather warnings through the Met Office website. Back to tonight, and some rain across parts of Northern Ireland. May turn a little heavy later in the night, but for many it'll be a dry night. The winds continuing to strengthen, and with a lot more cloud, it'll be a much milder night compared to recent nights across Scotland, Northern England and Northern Ireland. And for many, Wednesday will still be a dry and a bright day. Northern England, Eastern England, good part of Scotland staying dry, but there'll be showery rain over the Midlands, Wales and Southern England. That's going to pep up as we go through the day. Could turn pretty heavy during Wednesday evening across the south with a strengthening gusty wind as well. Wet and windy weather also working towards Northern Ireland, so some heavy bursts likely here through Wednesday evening. Temperatures into the teens, even the high teens in the south, but not feeling very warm with the wet and windy weather, which continues through Wednesday night and then in Thursday. On Thursday, grinds to a halt across eastern Scotland, hence why we have that amber warning in place here, but there'll still be heavy showers elsewhere as well.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News.